For me, one of the real pleasures of the winter months is returning for a brisk Sunday walk and being greeted by something sizzling and spitting in the oven at home, not to mention the evocative aroma that greets you. That's the great British traditional Sunday lunch. But if you haven't cooked Sunday lunch before, sometimes it can be a bit daunting, so I want to take you through the paces step by step. So if we begin at the beginning, we need the principal ingredient, which is meat, and today we're going to cook Sunday lunch with the good old roast beef of Old England. Now let's talk about the cut first of all. If it's a really special occasion, I would go for a sirloin joint on the bone with the fillet still in it. But for a family Sunday lunch, this is the next bit down on the anatomy, and this is what's called wing end of sirloin, and it's actually ribs of beef. And if you want to serve, say, 8 people, 6 to 8 people, and have some left over, then you need about 6 pounds in weight. And if I can just show you that, that actually means, in terms of ribs, 3 ribs, and you can see the ribs here. And what happens is the ribs, the big bone across here has been taken out to make it easier to carve, but the ribs act as a kind of a rack for roasting, and they help to conduct the heat inside whilst the meat is cooking. So it's good to have them there, and that's why it's better to always have some bone in the meat. I think it's better for flavour as well. Now, before the meat goes into the oven, you preheat it to its highest setting. It needs a good blast, so just turn it to its very highest and preheat the oven. Then before it goes into the oven, I'm going to just put some flour on the surface of the fat here. And whilst we're talking about fat, I just want to say that you really do have to have the fat there, because what the fat does, it provides basting juices to keep the joint moist and succulent. And you don't have to eat it. If you don't want to eat the fat, you don't have to eat it. I actually like eating it. And that's why I'm putting the mustard and the flour on, is because mustard and flour, this is about a dessert spoon of mustard, when it's cooking, makes the crust of the beef really nice and crusty. So you want a good piece of fat on it. Now I'm just going to put some pepper and salt on there, and then it's going to go into a roasting tin. But before it goes into the roasting tin, I think it's very important to just have a little word about roasting tins. Please invest in a really good, solid roasting tin. And the way to test whether you're getting the right roasting tin is, obviously, it's got to look solid and feel heavy. One like that will last you a whole lifetime. But the real telltale giveaway is a little label, and that little label says, "Do not place over direct heat." If it says roasting tin and it says do not place over direct heat, then for goodness sake, don't buy it. Don't waste your money, because that's what it is. As you'll see, as we go through our Sunday lunch, it's very important that tins can go over direct heat, and I'll show you why later. Now, in goes the beef, but first of all, I'm going to put an onion. 1 onion, cut in half like that, and rest the beef on it before it goes into the oven. And what happens is the onion will caramelise, and that'll make nice colour and juices for the gravy. And you'll need to cook it for 20 minutes at the high temperature. Then you take the temperature down to gas mark 5 or the equivalent, and you cook it for 15 minutes a pound if you like it rare, an extra 15 minutes if you like it medium, and an extra 30 minutes if you like it well done. And a 6-ounce piece, as I've said before here, 6-pound piece, will serve approximately 6 to 8 people. So in it goes for its first little blast of heat. Don't forget to put the timer on. Well, now we're going to have a look at preparing batter for Yorkshire pudding. And over here in my bowl, I've got 6 ounces of flour. And the flour has got to be sifted into a nice large roomy bowl, and lift the sieve up high. I said it before, but I keep saying it in case anybody didn't see the other programmes, and that's when you're using flour, it's packed in the supermarket into a bag, and it needs a good airing, because we want air in the Yorkshire pudding. Now when you've sifted your flour, add some salt And I think for Yorkshire pudding it's quite nice to have some pepper in there as well. And then make a little well in the centre of the flour and add 2 eggs. By the way, I hope I did say plain flour because it has to be plain flour. And I've got a confession to make to you that the other day I grabbed the nearest bag of flour out of the larder, made a Yorkshire pudding with self-raising flour, and it was quite a sight to see. It was absolutely flat as a pancake, and we all had to have little squares with our Sunday lunch. So you see, happens to me too. Now we're going to go in there with a whisk and start to whisk the eggs into the flour. What happens is, as you leave the whisk running, just move it around slightly, you'll find the flour begins to be incorporated into the eggs. And then there comes a stage when it gets a bit thick like this. So switch off, and then we're going to see to the liquid. And the liquid for a Yorkshire pudding with 2 eggs and 6 ounces of flour is actually 6 fluid ounces of milk and 4 fluid ounces of water. So you've got half a pint of liquid there altogether. And now the next stage is to gradually incorporate the liquid into the rest. So we'll switch on again. And because I need both hands, I'm just going to switch off a minute and put a cloth underneath the bowl there, because that'll steady it so that I've got both hands free. You don't have to worry about lumps, because the whisk will take care of all the flour and disperse it into the liquid. So just keep going, adding a bit more and a bit more. It can all go in now at the end. And then just give it a good whisk. And then if you want to, you can make it well in advance in your scheme for the morning, or you can make it at the last minute. I have tried it. I mean, there used to be old-fashioned cooks used to say you had to make your batter in advance and let it stand, but I've made it both ways, and I really honestly can't see any difference. So what I'll do with that now is just leave it aside, and then that's my Yorkshire pudding batter all ready to go into the tin later on. One of the secrets of really good roast beef is to give it a good basting. You'll see the fat begins to run, and if you keep basting it, the fat has a chance to keep the meat nice and moist and succulent. So what I do is I always give it 2 or 3 bastings during the cooking time. Right, now that's going to need half an hour's more cooking time, but before it goes back into the oven, what I'm going to do, you'll see now that quite a lot of fat has come out of it. So what I'm going to do is tip the fat to the corner of the tin and just skim it off into a bowl here. And if you take the fat from the beef and you make your Yorkshire pudding and your roast potatoes using the same fat as the beef, then the whole meal has the same kind of flavour attached to it. If you put roast potatoes in an alien flavoured oil, it's not the same thing at all. Now you don't want to take the juices out, just the fat. So what you can see there is I'm not taking any juices, just the fat. And that's going to be waiting now for the roast potatoes and the Yorkshire pudding. And the beef will just go back into the oven for another 30 minutes. Now the beef should be cooked, and we have worked out the timings very carefully for you, so you don't really have to worry about whether it's cooked or not. But if you are worried, you can just do another little test like this with a skewer. If you put the skewer in the thickest part of the beef, like that, press it down, and then just press it with your hand, you'll see the juices run up to the surface. And if the juices are just nicely pink and you like your beef cooked medium, then it's done. Now, the next thing you do is transfer it to a hot serving platter. Make sure that you get it nice and hot, like that. What you're going to do now is let the beef relax and rest for an hour while you do the potatoes and the Yorkshire pudding. Now don't worry about that, it won't get cold because it holds its heat, but let me explain to you the principles of why you should do that, why you should let it rest. What happens is when you're cooking beef is the blast of heat brings all the juices right up to the surface. And then when you take it out of the oven, if you let it rest, that gives all those juices time to sort of seep back down into the meat. And that's what's going to make it nice and juicy and succulent to eat. And the way to do that is to just cover it with a tent of foil, leave it in a warm place, and it'll be perfect in an hour's time. Now we're going to see to the roast potatoes. And again, here I've got another really good, solid roasting tray, and remember the fat that we spooned off the beef? Well, that's gone on to here now, about 7 tablespoons of fat, beef fat, and that's going to go into the oven with the heat increased now to gas mark 7 or the equivalent, and that's going to have 10 minutes in the oven to become nice and sizzling hot. And then it's time to put the potatoes on to boil, and they go in boiling salted water for 10 minutes. Right, after 10 minutes you drain the potatoes, drain the water off, then you put the lid on and use a cloth to protect your hands, and then give the whole thing a really good hefty shake. What they need is a bit of rough stuff, because what's going to happen is after you've done that, as you can see here, they go lovely and fluffy all around the edges, and it's that fluff when it hits the hot fat that gives you the crunch. That is provided you've got your fat really hot. And make sure when you're dealing with hot fat you have your hands well protected, and we're just going to get the fat out of the oven now, and then we're going to place it over direct heat. And now, for the first time, you're seeing why it's very, very important with roasting that you have really, really solid tins, because then they can go onto direct heat. The heat isn't high, it's only low, but it's going to keep it really hot while I spoon the potatoes in, because that does take a minute. So let's put the first one in now, and you'll see what I mean. As it hits the fat, big sizzle. So just spoon the potatoes in. And what I haven't said to you so far, and I must tell you, is the variety of potatoes I'm using. I think that red Desiree potatoes make the best roast potatoes. Now when they hit the hot fat, you then just tip it slightly, again protecting your hands, and give them a basting. Then you put them back into the hot oven, high shelf, and when you put them back in, pop the Yorkshire pudding tin in at the same time. Now the Yorkshire pudding tin has been preheated in the oven for 10 minutes with 2 tablespoons of fat in it. You take it out, put it again over direct heat, and then you just pour the batter in. You can see that's really smoking hot, and that's vital. So in it goes. And then back into the oven quickly, and it will take 40 minutes to cook. So now I'm going to give you a gravy lesson. There's no excuse for anybody to use those nasty old packets of chemicals, because we're now going to see just how easy gravy is to make. Now in the roasting tin here, I've removed the meat, and the next thing I'm going to do is, if you tip the pan, you'll see that the juices separate from the fat. And we want about 2 tablespoons of fat for gravy, so I'm going to take some of that off now and put it into my bowl and just leave 2 tablespoons behind. So probably what I'm going to need now is about 2 tablespoons out of there. Then I'm going to take my wooden spoon and first of all just kind of release all these lovely crusty bits, because the crusty bits here are what give the gravy its nice rich colour and flavour. The onion can go, having given us that lovely caramel colour, so we'll get rid of that. And now, with the heat turned fairly low, I'm going to add flour. And I've got a heaped tablespoon of flour there. That goes in, and then you get to work with your wooden spoon and you begin to blend the flour into the fat. And those of you who've been watching this series so far will have seen me make a white sauce, and the same principles apply here. If you've got fat and flour, you can blend them and make them smooth. It's only when you mix liquid with flour that you get lumps. And you can see all the little lumps disappear as you work with your wooden spoon. They all disappear into the fat and they're gone forever. The liquid we're going to use is vegetable stock. Remember, we blanched the potatoes for 10 minutes, so I've got potato water here, but you can use any vegetable cooking water. And what you do now is you begin to add that just a little bit at a time, still working with your wooden spoon. Now, after you've added quite a bit of the liquid, it's best to get rid of the wooden spoon and then go in with one of these, which is a balloon whisk. If you want it thicker, add less liquid. If you want it thinner, add a little bit more liquid. And then you just need to have a taste. Add some freshly milled pepper. You might need some salt, you might not, because there's salt in the vegetable stock. And then your gravy is ready to be poured into a warm jug and taken to the table. And here we have the roast potatoes and the Yorkshire pudding ready at the same time, but you remove the potatoes first because the Yorkshire pudding has to be served presto pronto at the last minute. So we leave that in for another minute or two while I just show you the potatoes. And this is what a proper roast potato should look like. It should be very crisp and crunchy on the outside. And I'm just going to lift it up and give it a tap so you can see. Crisp and crunchy on the outside, and lovely and floury and soft on the inside. Right, the last thing to come out of the oven then is the Yorkshire pudding. And what I haven't told you so far is that this is an 11 by 9 inch tin, and it'll make a Yorkshire pudding that will serve 6 to 8 people. But let me just show you what it actually looks like. It's nice and crunchy on the outside. And then it has a little bit of soft and squidgy on the inside, and that's how a Yorkshire pudding should be. And this is the best bit of all. Time to relax and enjoy one of the best Sunday lunches ever invented. I like to serve it with Brussels sprouts or one of the other lovely green vegetables that are available at this time of the year. And this is something a little different to serve with beef. This is horseradish, creme fraiche and grain mustard sauce. Still on the subject of Sunday lunch, how do you get really crisp, crunchy, crackling? Well, it really isn't a problem if you know how. Firstly, make sure the skin is completely dry, then score it through with a sharp knife. Sprinkle a tablespoon of salt crystals all over the skin and press it in. Then roast in a hot oven, gas mark 9, for 30 minutes, reduce the temperature to gas mark 5 and give it 35 minutes to the pound. Then it's going to look just like this. And a lovely way to serve it is with these little stuffed apples. They're coxes that have been filled with a mixture of pork sausage meat, parsley, thyme and seasoning. And then they're baked in the oven for 25 minutes when the pork comes out. Well, one thing you need to learn if you're not a seasoned Sunday lunch cook is never serve a first course, because otherwise you'll feel guilty then if you have an extra roast potato. But one of the things you really do need to have is, I think, especially when the weather's cold outside, is a proper pudding. And we in Britain are very, very good at making proper puddings. And I want to show you one now. This is sticky gingerbread puddings. They're made with apple and they're served with a ginger wine and brandy sauce. And we're going to start off with preserved ginger, which comes in its own syrup in a jar like this, and that's very widely available. And the recipe needs 4 ounces of that, so this is 4 ounces of stem ginger, and I'm going to chop it in the food processor, which is the easiest way to chop it. That's it, no more than that. Right, now that's ready for the puddings. If you don't have a processor, don't worry, you can sit down with a sharp knife and chop it by hand. Won't take too long. Right, that's ready. Now we're just going to make the mix for the pudding. And over here in my mixing bowl, I've started sifting flour, and I've got 6 ounces of self-raising flour. And if you've been wondering for the last couple of years, is there life after sticky toffee pudding? Yes, there is. This is it. We've worked very hard on this recipe, and I think actually it's better than sticky toffee puddings, if you can believe that. So 6 ounces of self-raising flour, and then, because it's an all-in-one method, more raising agent. And here I've got 3/4 of a teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda, and I've got 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. So that goes in as well. And then some spices, and the spices I'm using, here I've got a heaped teaspoon of freshly grated ginger. So that's going to go in. We'll give a nice fresh ginger flavour. And then I've got powdered ginger here. And what I've got here is 1/4 teaspoon of powdered ginger. If you can't get fresh, then just use a teaspoon of powdered. This is cinnamon, and this is 1/3 teaspoon of cinnamon. And the next one is cloves, and there's 1/3 teaspoon also of powdered cloves, which will give it a nice spiciness. Now I'm going to use black treacle, and I change my mind about how to measure black treacle all the time. This is the latest way, a tip given to me by a friend, and that is, first of all, you grease your tablespoon. We need a tablespoon here. Grease it with butter, put it into the treacle, and get a tablespoon of treacle, and then take it over to your mix and use a good spatula and just slide it. Comes off beautifully like that, off the greased spoon. So that's the treacle, a tablespoonful of treacle. Then you've got to get it off the spatula. So we'll just do that. A tablespoonful of treacle. Next, I've got butter. This is 3 ounces of butter here, and it must be room temperature, really soft like that, so a knife goes straight into it. And then 2 large size 1 eggs, they go in next. What's good about this is it's an all-in-one mixture, so everything gets mixed up together. Next, I've got dark molasses sugar, and that's 4 ounces. And now, what I'm going to do is put a cloth under my bowl here to steady it and begin to mix that, and then there's 1 more ingredient needed. 2 more ingredients. The first one, start to mix first to just get everything amalgamated, and then the next ingredient is water, and it's 6 fluid ounces of warm water. So keeping the whisk running, I'll just gradually add the water. Now all that's going to need now is some apple, 6 ounces, not fluid ounces, 6 ounces weight of chopped Bramley apple. You can see it's chopped into small dice. And then lastly, the ginger, the chopped ginger. Just fold the apple and the ginger into the rest of the mixture, and then it's all ready now for baking. And we're going to put it into these. These are 6 fluid ounce little metal pudding pots, and you'll notice they've been well buttered, and you need to fill them to about 1 inch from the top, and then they're ready to be baked in the oven. You preheat the oven to gas mark 4, line them all up on a baking sheet, put them on the centre shelf, and they should take about 30 to 35 minutes. But we do have some that are ready, so let's just have a look now. And the way to tell if they're ready is exactly the same way as a cake, actually, and just give it a press with your little finger like that, and if it springs back, as that is there, then you know it's ready. If your finger leaves a depression, then put them back in for another 5 minutes or so. Right, they can come out now. And then you leave them to settle and cool down in the tin. in the tins for about 5 minutes before actually turning them out. Now I'd like to show you how to make the sauce that goes with the puddings. And in my saucepan I've got 4 ounces of butter and 6 ounces of soft brown sugar. And this is not the molasses sugar this time, this is just the dark soft brown sugar. And I'm just going to amalgamate those together and then add one other ingredient at this stage, and that is ginger wine. And you add 4 tablespoons of ginger wine, and then you keep the heat fairly low and leave it for about 5 or 6 minutes. Then, when all the sugar has dissolved, we're going to add 2 more ingredients. One is 2 tablespoons of brandy, which really does give the most wonderful flavour, the ginger and the brandy together. And then 2 more pieces of chopped preserved ginger, which have been chopped not quite as small as in the puddings, little bit larger than that. And I chop those by hand. And the sauce is now ready for the puddings. Pour the sauce over the puddings, and then you take them to a preheated grill. And the preheated grill is turned to its highest setting, and then you just put the puddings under the grill about 4 inches from the grill, and the heat will reheat the puddings and at the same time give you a lovely toasted crusty bit on the top. So if you want a little taste of heaven now, here it is, sticky gingerbread puddings. And how do you follow that? Easily. Yet another absolute winner is chocolate bread and butter pudding. First, in a bowl placed over a saucepan of barely simmering water, melt 3 ounces of butter, 5 ounces of dark continental chocolate, 4 ounces of sugar and 3/4 of a pint of whipping cream. Now add 4 tablespoons of dark rum and just a pinch of cinnamon. Then gently whisk all this together. After that, remove it from the heat and then add it to 3 size 1 eggs that have been whisked together. To assemble the pudding, first spoon a layer of this mixture into a shallow oven-proof dish and arrange triangles of bread in it. Next, cover the bread with half the remaining mixture, put another layer of bread over the top and coat completely with the remaining mixture. Now cover and allow the pudding to stand for at least 24 hours. Bake the pudding in a preheated oven, gas mark 4, for 30 to 35 minutes. Now I have a promise. Chocolate bread and butter pudding is to die for. Well, that's it. A little bit of hard work. All you need now is a really comfortable armchair, possibly a football match, and a good strong cup of coffee. Well, that's all from Sunday Lunches. Next time we'll be celebrating the party season.